All right. Hello and good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Today we're going to continue to work through our very slow reading through the book of Revelation. We do this once a month. Out of our 8 or 9 teachings a month, we just kind of devote one to going through Revelation. The passage is only 11 verses long, but as you might understand, sometimes there's just a lot packed into it. So I'll do the best that I can to try to help us understand what in the world is taking place here. I think a lot of it is actually pretty straightforward. There's just a lot of information that is that's in here. So I'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Are you able to see the PowerPoint in front of you? If you are, just kind of give me a thumbs up so I know we're good. Okay. Okay. So very, very important that obviously you pay attention, because there's a lot of small details that get overlooked in kind of casual readings of this that are highly significant. So of course, I always encourage people to follow along. And if you have a question, just kind of hold on to it. And then once we get to the end, hopefully I'll have answered your question, or I'll have enough time to answer all the questions that we have. So without further ado, let's begin with this here. So today we'll look at this passage. It's basically the second half, you could say, of Revelation chapter 12. It kind of divides 1 through 6, 7 through 17, even though it's not really an even divide, but kind of from a topical divide. That's a good place to divide it. Although the reality is all of chapter 12 is really one big topic. So if you haven't caught up with the teaching that we did on 1 through 6, might be a little bit lost, but we'll do the best that we can to try to fill in the gaps. Okay, so I kind of want to start off and just read the passage, and I kind of divided even this section up into three little sections here, and I think you'll kind of understand how it works. And just keeping to mind that we've already read a section. When I say already, I mean verses 1 through 6, where we have this serpent who is pursuing this celestial woman. The woman gives birth to a son. We learn that the son is Jesus. Before the serpent can attack this son, the son is exalted to heaven. Okay, and that's kind of a big deal there. So the timing and the ordering of all this is not insignificant. All right, so let me start with this little section here. So starting in verse 7 in Revelation 12, this is all out of the NASB. And there was a war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Next section. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For, tells us why, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcome him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he only has a short time. Next little section. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river, which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Wow, that's a pretty interesting passage. Well, let me tell you, if there was one passage that I could point to try to point to readers that, hey, you can't just read Revelation like literally all the way through because it just would be nonsensical. Revelation chapter 12 is a good one, okay? It's just, there's 100 details in here that just don't make sense literally. So we understand that there's, I don't want to say that it's, some people think, well, you've got literal on one side and you've got spiritual on the other, as if spiritual is not literal. Well, I don't know if that's the best way of saying it, because Jesus literally died on the cross, and that's a very spiritual truth. I think it's much more symbolic. I think there's a lot of imagery that's taking place here. It's very clear that the writer is drawing on the Old Testament and these major images in the Old Testament. And I'm going to point out to you some images from the Old Testament that probably you haven't even considered yet. But of course, he is also drawing on images that were familiar to Revelation's original readers that were just kind of popular there in the Greek culture. They're not popular to us because we don't live in that same Greek culture. We don't live in Asia Minor. So let's try to make some sense as to what is taking place here. By the way, this is a highly practical section of Scripture, very, very practical. So let's just kind of start off here. So we got this little section here, verses 7 through 8, which talks about, and there was a war in heaven. That and there, by the way, is connecting to obviously what was previously said. Michael and his angels waged war with the dragon. Dragon and his angels waged war. They weren't strong enough. There was no longer a place found for them in heaven. So I think it's interesting to point out that God doesn't fight the dragon and his angels, nor does Christ enter into the fight. Their subordinates are capable enough to do the job. Okay? It's not a war between God and the devil. I mean, it's the forces of God against the forces of the devil, but God doesn't have to do this. And even Christ, who has recently been resurrected and exalted to heaven 2 verses earlier, even he doesn't have to do it. Their subordinates, Michael and the angels, they are capable enough of waging this particular war. Okay? It's kind of just an interesting point. Now, here's one that I think is extremely important for us to consider. There's an important point in the Greek that makes for a difficulty in translating the passage into English, okay? And really kind of the force of the Greek, the way that it's really pushing, indicates that Michael and his angels went to wage war, or perhaps it could be translated, Michael and his angels had to wage war, okay? The important takeaway here is that the initiative for the war was on God's side, not on Satan's, okay? I'm pointing this out because there's just a popular kind of internet reading of this passage that there was a rebellion and, kind of Satan and his angels rebelled against the forces of God. That's not what the passage says. It's because of the resurrection and exaltation of Jesus, then Michael and the angels start a war with the dragon and his angels to the point to where the dragon and the angels are evicted from heaven. Okay? The initiative is on the side of of God's people, of God's side. Okay, so that's an important point that you might not see in your English translation, but but every one of the commentators points this out, that it's a difficult thing to translate into kind of sensible English, but there's definitely the sense that the initiative unambiguously was on the side of Michael and his angels. Okay, this is not a rebellion. This is Michael and the angels kicking out the dragon and his angels. Okay. It's also important to note that this war breaks out in heaven as a result of the Messiah's exaltation to heaven. Okay, 2 verses earlier in our passage. Okay, Jesus was exalted to heaven. Okay, he was exalted to God's right hand. He is sitting at God's right hand, which means that Jesus is enthroned at God's right hand, and that creates a victorious circumstance. Obviously, the exaltation to heaven assumes that Jesus died and rose from the grave. Okay, he doesn't have to mention the resurrection because the exaltation implies the resurrection. Okay, but there's nothing in this passage that says that this was some sort of event that happened like way back in Genesis. Just that is not self-evident from reading this passage. Okay, in fact, the normal way of reading it, just on a plain reading, is that this happened after Jesus' exaltation, immediately after Jesus' exaltation. Okay, and what we learn and see in the rest of the passage is that the result of the dragon and his angels being evicted from heaven is something that Christians have to deal with. They have to deal with that. Okay, so I'm aware that this is probably something that is new for some people, but I don't think that the other teachings on this are really that justified based on the evidence that we have, the plain reading of the evidence that we have in this passage alone. So he's pointing those things out. And if there are questions about that, we can answer them later. So here's the other interesting thing that almost always gets left out. Okay, so in apocalyptic works like Daniel, and Revelation is the other primary apocalyptic work, battles in heaven between angels, and when I mean between angels, it's like 2 or more angels are fighting together. They are precursors to conflicts on earth. Okay, the battles in heaven are precursors to conflicts on earth. Okay, in these heavenly battles, the angels represent various communities. Okay, so we're going to see it. I'm going to show you some passages in Daniel to where there are angels that represent Israel or represent Persia or represent Greece. And actually, if you read the beginning of all of the letters to the 7 churches, it'll say to the angel in Ephesus, to the angel in Smyrna, to the angel in Pergamum. Okay, it's very common. The point is, in apocalyptic works, it's one of the things that we look at when we look at things that make Daniel and Revelation alike, is that you have angels, and angels represent communities. Okay, and so what we see in our passage, and we've already read the rest of it, is that we have this battle that goes on in heaven, and what's the result of the battle? Eventually we learn that there's going to be conflict on earth between the people of God and between the serpent. Okay, but that's how these apocalyptic works function, is that what goes on in heaven reflects what eventually is going to go on earth. Or sorry, what takes place in heaven is eventually going to be reflected in what takes place on earth. Okay, and so you can look at battles in the skies and you can say, oh, okay, that's either a good sign or a bad omen as to what is going to take place here on earth. So, okay, so let's look here. I want to show you passages to where it demonstrates that angels having conflict in heaven indicate to readers that there's going to be a very soon following conflict on earth. Okay, here's a passage out of Daniel 10. So this is just kind of context as to how this sort of apocalyptic meaning would function. Daniel 10 and verse 12. Here, by the way, an angel appeared to Daniel. So it says, when he said to me, that's he, an angel, said to me, Daniel, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Okay. Now in this section, the word prince, which actually is the Hebrew word sar, where we get a lot of Semitic words for prince, like the modern word czar. It's a word that refers to angels. And what you have going on here is you've got this angel who wanted to come and help Daniel, but he was confronted. He was being withstood by this prince of Persia. Okay. And so they were fighting. Okay. And then you have Michael, who is also one of the chief princes. That's how you know that prince refers to an angel in this sense. He came and had to help the angel that was coming to help Daniel. Okay. So you've got Michael and this unnamed angel were fighting this other angel that was representing Persia. Michael, by the way, is one of the chief princes. We do know that in the New Testament, Michael is called the archangel. And of course, Michael is in our current passage, as you can see, in Revelation 12:7. Okay. And the interesting thing is that from the time that Daniel is set in, the following nation that is going to become the new world power is Persia. So it's very, very interesting that it goes kind of, it moves in world history based on this confronting angel who is representing Persia. A couple verses later, still in Daniel 10, then he said to me, this is still that angel, do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I'm going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly against me, against these forces, except Michael, your prince. That's Daniel 10, verses 20 through 21. So there we see that now the angel that was talking to Daniel, he's going to go back to fighting the prince of Persia. And then he says, look, the prince of Greece, that person is going to come right after that. And we know from history that after Persia was kind of the major world power, that Greece became the major world power after that. Okay, so you can see how it's already kind of telling us that these angels representing various communities fighting are precursors to conflicts and wars that are going to happen on earth. Okay, and then he tells us that Michael is your prince, which tells us that Michael is the prince or the angel that represents Israel. Okay, so there we got a prince of Persia, we got a prince of Greece, and a prince of Israel. And then I pointed this out already. Looky here, we got to the angel of the church of Ephesus, right? Okay, every one of the letters to 7 churches begins with, to the angel of this particular community. You got an angel of Ephesus, you got an angel of Smyrna, you got an angel of Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. That's just common. And you can see there that the function of the angels in apocalyptic works is that they represent communities. We got that. Okay? And either they are supporting their side, the people of God, or they're supporting the side of the devil and his angels. Okay. But the point is, the conflicts that they have that are going on in heaven are precursors to conflicts that are going to take place here on earth. And in Daniel, we know that the Israel, after the Babylonian captivity, which basically happens at the beginning of Daniel chapter 1, after that, the next major world power is Persia, and the next major world power after that is Greece, or the Greek kingdom. And it's depicted here with the imagery of successive angels coming into conflict with the angels of God. Okay? That's very, very, very important in understanding apocalyptic works, and that is just completely missed, completely absent from popular readings of Revelation. They're just unfamiliar with the evidence. So that's something to consider. I don't think that's that difficult to see. I think you have to kind of put the evidence together all on the table and just kind of work with what you have. Okay, so the interesting thing here is that we see that there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And so I put here on our 5th point, there's no longer a place for the dragon and his angels, but I'm focusing on this word place because I see this word place repeat itself throughout Revelation chapter 12. There is a place for God's people in the midst of this conflict. Okay, because the battle with the angels, that only covers like one verse. And then the rest of the passage deals with the conflict between the dragon and the woman, or the dragon and the people of God, excuse me. So look here, just previous verse 6, says, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So she has a place. The devil loses his place. And then a few verses later in our passage, the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so she would fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times, and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. Okay? So the devil loses his place, and the people of God, who are represented by a woman, they get a place. Okay? So that's just an interesting point. It's thematic there in the passage. Okay, verse 9, the great dragon was thrown down, who, by the way, if you didn't already know, is the serpent of old. He is called the devil and Satan. He deceives the entire world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Okay, so if there's any question before about whom this beastly dragon represented, there should be no question now. Okay, this is one of the best verses that say, hey, by the way, if you didn't already know, that serpent of old, and the devil, and Satan, and the dragon, and the deceiver, it's all one and the same thing, okay? With respect to my Christadelphian friends, this is not some sort of evil that's inside of you or sin that is inside of you. No one would say what is written here in chapter 12, verse 9, if evil was just something merely that was inside you. This is the serpent of old. This is the devil, the slanderer, the Satan, the accuser, the deceiver, the one who deceives the entire world. And he's thrown down, okay? Now, Revelation reveals here the enormous potential of the antagonist of God's people. Because, we read this in chapter 12, verse 9, and we think, okay, I already know all that. We all know that, the devil is Satan, the deceiver, and the serpent. We get that, okay? But sometimes it's hard for us in our culture. This is kind of a side point. Sometimes we look at evil in the world, or we look at people that are deceived, and we think to ourselves, how could there just be this much evil in the world? How could people be so godless? Or how could people not be able to see the truth? And we forget that the devil is described here as this massive fiery red dragon. It's trying to depict the devil. And Revelation says, okay, if we're going to depict things with imagery of animals and beasts, what is the most terrifying animal that it can come up with? And that's a dragon, okay? It doesn't pick, a pit bull dog or a tiger or, some other sort of massive animal. It picks a dragon, okay? It's trying to tell us, and this is how we need to read this, the enormous potential of the antagonist of God's people. Okay. Now, if you were one of those persons living in the 7 churches, and you were to be asked, who is evil in our world? Who are the evil people? You might say that it's these local Jews that harass us. It's the synagogue down the street that harass us. They're the evil ones. Or perhaps it's the imperial agents that are enforcing emperor worship. Okay, maybe it's the emperor himself. Maybe it's Caesar himself. These are the people that are evil. That's how some people would answer that question. Okay, but this dragon is the Satan, with a definite article in Greek. He is the Satan, okay, who is in the business of deception. Okay, he is the one who currently is deceiving the entire world. He is the deceiver, okay? Again, it's not just, Jews that get, come into conflict with you, or imperial agents, or even the emperor. It is the Satan, the deceiver, the dragon. Okay. Now, the dragon is also called the serpent. Okay. And here's something that's interesting. The fact remains that the local divinities in Asia Minor, some of these we've looked at before in detail, Asclepius, Dionysus, Sabazius, Cybele, and Zeus, these local divinities were frequently depicted as serpents. Okay, archaeologically, they have uncovered these temples, and they found images of all of these different gods and goddesses, and they were depicted as serpents. Okay, we know in particular, you see this on the side of an ambulance where you have the staff that has the serpent that goes up it there. That's Asclepius, the god of healing. Okay, and those Asclepius temples were all over Asia Minor. And a lot of the Christians were tempted to go and to partake in that sort of way of getting healed. And you know what Revelation says? Revelation says that serpent that you think is a healer, that serpent is the devil. That serpent is Satan. It is the deceiver of the entire world. And it's been defeated by the Lamb. It's already been kicked out of heaven. Okay? So readers of Revelation would want to distance themselves from compromising with these divinities, knowing that Satan is actually behind them. Okay? So the point is, Revelation is one of the major things that the book of Revelation is trying to do is it's trying to deter its readers from compromising with sin, compromising with false worship. And the way that we compromise is that we say, I can do all of this stuff over here, and it's not that big a deal. It's okay. It's just a little bit of sin. Or maybe the early Christians were thinking, now we can go visit these temples and we can eat the meat sacrificed to idols because, come on, we know these idols, they're not even real. They're not idols. They're just, carvings of wood and stone, and they're not even real. So if I'm eating meat sacrificed to this idol, the idol's not real, no harm, no foul, no big deal. Revelation says, no, you can't do that. You can't do that stuff. And here's one of the reasons. Because the devil is real, and it's this massive antagonist. And we can't forget that even today. All right, verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, power, kingdom of our God, and authority of his Christ have come. Why? Why did they come? For, there's that connecting word, the accuser, that's another name for the serpent, of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. Okay, so let me tell you, I used to struggle with this passage because it seems to say that the kingdom of God has come. Well, how could the kingdom of God come based on the devil being kicked out of heaven? I'm thinking, because the passage goes on and there's there's still conflict between the people of God, and there's no resurrection of the dead. There's no kingdom of God on the earth. There's no, reigning and ruling with Christ. There's no day of judgment. What's going on here? So I was struggling to figure this out. Here's my best attempt at figuring out what in the world is going on here. Verses 10 through 12 encompass, first of all, another one of Revelation's hymns, Hymns, which should be meditated upon in the liturgy and the theology of the local church. So you can kind of go back and look in verses 10 through 12 and write in your margin that this is one of the hymns. This is one of the worship songs that Revelation gives us. And Revelation is not just prophecy, it's also evoking and encouraging us to rejoice and to celebrate based on the truths that are there. Okay? But the important causal connection of this causes that, between, on one hand, the accuser being thrown down, and on the other hand, the arrival of the salvation power, kingdom/reign, and the authority of Christ. Okay, that connection there. Notice in the passage, okay, where it says, now, okay, that's time located, now the salvation power and kingdom of our God and the authority of our Christ have come. Why? For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. Okay, so there's a connection there. The accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, has been evicted from heaven, and that is a way, in the sense that salvation power, the reign of God, and the authority of Christ have come. Okay? Since these four, salvation, power, kingdom, and authority, are connected with Satan's eviction from heaven, they cannot refer to the fullest consummation of the kingdom. Okay, we talk about how the kingdom has been inaugurated The kingdom was inaugurated with the ministry of Jesus. Of course, the ministry of Jesus ultimately ended with his resurrection and exaltation to heaven. So God's reign has broken into the present. The age to come has broken into the present evil age. The powers of the age to come have been realized right now. Okay, but we know that there's going to be a full, complete, 100% consummation in the future when Jesus visibly and actually returns to heaven. Okay, so in other words, I think this passage is just another passage that talks about the already of the kingdom, or the inauguration of God's reign, but it's not talking about the not yet or the future full consummation. Okay, so just make sure that we're clear on this. Okay, you've got how the reign of God, and the word kingdom is just another word for reign. The reign of God breaks into history with the ministry of Jesus through his preaching, his miracles, his exorcisms, his death, resurrection, and clearly here, his exaltation. His exaltation here brings about salvation, power, reign, and authority. Okay, but that's not the full sense. That's just a preview. That's just an appetizer. That's just a down payment, you could say. Of course, we have the gift of the Spirit is also a down payment of the age to come. We know the fullest sense comes when Jesus actually comes back, and that's when the completeness of salvation is going to be inherited by us with resurrection bodies, the completeness of the power of God that defeats evil, the fullness of God's reign that's going to encompass all the earth, and the fullness of the authority of Christ will be made manifest. Okay, so this is a passage of the already and the inauguration of God's reign. Okay, so there may be a similarity here when Jesus taught that when he cast out demons by the Spirit of God, then the reign or the kingdom of God has come upon you. That's what it says in Matthew 12:28. Jesus says, when I cast out demons, then the reign of God has come upon you. What has happened in our passage? The devil has been cast out of heaven, and look, the reign of God and the authority of Christ has come upon us. Okay? So what we're reading here, if you think this passage in chapter 12 and verse 10 is a little strange and confusing, this is actually something that Jesus has already taught. It's already a truth that's been taught to us in the Gospels. And there's a parallel in Luke 11:20 with Matthew 12:28. Okay? Now, the authority of Christ, I like how it says right here, the authority of Christ has come. That was already taught as given to Jesus. Notice when? At his resurrection and ascension. Okay, so first thing that Jesus says, according to Matthew, after his resurrection, is all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Okay, so the authority of heaven and earth was given to Jesus after his resurrection, right at the time of his exaltation. Okay, so here what do we have here? Jesus has been exalted to heaven, and the authority of Christ has come. So again, that phrase, the authority of Christ has come, in connection with the exaltation of Jesus and the eviction of Satan. That's not a new teaching. That's something Jesus already taught and said himself in Matthew 28:18. Something for us to consider. Verse 11. Okay, still part of this hymn, by the way. Let me kind of look at my time. How am I doing? Oh my gosh. So I got so much more to do. That's okay. These are richly dense passages of Scripture. There's just so much truth in them. It's one of my favorite verses right here in Revelation. I'm just going to tell you, one of my favorite verses. They overcame him, or they conquered him. They, the people of God, conquered the devil. Why? Because of three things. One, the blood of the Lamb. Two, because of the word of their testimony. And three, they did not love their life even when faced with death. Okay, so they, the brethren, the brothers and sisters, the family of God, all of us, we can conquer the dragon because of these three important factors. And these detail, it's what's interesting here, how the reign of God and the authority of Christ can be realized in our lives in the present. So it's very interesting that verse 10 tells us that the reign of God and the authority of Christ has come, and then it tells us how to defeat the devil, okay? How can we bring about the reign of God in our lives? How can we share in the authority of Christ in our lives, we do it by overcoming and conquering the devil. And we do it specifically by doing these three things. And of course, the point that I've tried to make is that the way that a Christian conquers somebody in the book of Revelation is very, very different than the way that someone would be conquered in the first century. In the first century, you would conquer somebody by defeating them with violence. You would take out your sword and you would kill them, and you would shed their blood. You would kill another person. That's how you know you conquered them, okay? So how do we conquer the dragon? Well, we do it by the blood of the Lamb. Notice, by the way, that the dragon is conquered by somebody else dying. We conquer the dragon because not because we killed the dragon, but because the dragon killed Jesus. That's the paradox, okay? You know, we don't conquer the dragon by killing him. We conquer the dragon because somebody else died, because Jesus died by the blood of the Lamb, okay? It's strange that you conquer the dragon by someone else's blood. This is paradoxical. Revelation describes the faithful conquerors as those who, by the way, have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, okay? So we conquer the devil by identifying with the blood of Jesus in a very real, powerful, and intimate way. I mean, the imagery is that we wash our robes, our outward manifestation of our inward commitment to God and Christ, with the blood of the Lamb, okay? And I don't know if you ever get blood on your clothes, there's blood, okay? You know, washing something with blood, you just don't do that. We wash things with detergent, but we wash ourselves in our outward manifestation of the inward commitment to God with the blood of the Lamb, okay? So we conquer the dragon with the blood of Jesus, okay? With the word of their testimony. So this here is, again, notice the word is not the Bible. I have to keep pointing this out to people who keep saying, you know, I'm gonna teach the word. I'm gonna learn from the word. I'm gonna read from the word. In the New Testament, and just make this point nicely to people. In the New Testament, 99% of the time, the word or message refers to the gospel message. In fact, it never refers to the Bible. The word means the spoken gospel message. So the word of their testimony is the testimony that they speak forth as the word of the gospel. Okay, so that's just another place that demonstrates that. So we conquer the dragon by preaching the gospel. The preaching of the gospel of the kingdom is an act of faithful witness, and it contributes to the dragon's defeat. Okay, so here's how we defeat the dragon, how we conquer the dragon. We speak forth the word of another kingdom that is coming. The dragon could represent the kingdom of Rome or any other kingdom of the world that is opposed to the things of God. But we speak forth the message and the gospel of the real kingdom, the kingdom of God, the future kingdom. Okay, and by the way, this was already taught by Jesus. Look here in Luke chapter 10, where it says the 70 returned, the 70 were out preaching the kingdom, and they said, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, this is Jesus, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Notice how that the disciples, the 70, not just the 12, the 70, they were preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and Satan was being defeated. He was falling. He was being defeated. And here we see, look here, we defeat the devil. We conquer the devil by the preaching of the gospel message as well. So again, Revelation is not teaching us something new. It's something that was already taught in the Gospels. Okay, we even talk about this, that we say, oh, how the mighty have fallen. And here we see Satan was landed a defeat at the preaching of the gospel. And here we can defeat and conquer the devil by the preaching of the gospel. And then we have the last phrase, they did not love their life even when faced with death. This is probably the toughest one from a Christian commitment for us to stand for. I'm going to say that again. They did not love their life even when faced with death. This is a deeply paradoxical image where believers conquer by being willing to suffer martyrdom and be conquered themselves. Okay, that's just a completely nonsensical understanding of conquering in the first century world. Okay, the Romans conquered Jesus because the Romans crucified Jesus on the cross. Okay, so the Romans were the conquerors. Jesus was the conquered person. Okay. So in their world, and in every single depiction of conquerors and conquering that was out there, in every manner of media that was possible, the conqueror was the one that lived and defeated the conquered by killing them. Here, we conquer the devil by being willing to be faithful, even if it costs us our own life. We conquer by being willing to die ourselves. It's just like nobody conquers by dying. If someone dies, you think they've been conquered. And yet Revelation has already told us in chapter 5 that Jesus is the true conqueror because he died for us. He is a true conqueror because he was faithful to God in the entirety of his life, and it cost him his own life. And that's what made him a real conqueror. And of course, this is the example of Jesus who set the standard for Revelation's paradoxical conquering by being martyred. You can go back and look at that in chapter 5, verses 5 through 6. The Lamb also did not love his life, even when faced with death. Okay? So you can just think of the Gospels. Jesus, that he was on the cross, and they say, come off the cross if you want to. Or, Jesus is given all these ways that he can compromise, he can give in, or he gets he gets attacked at night by all the Roman guards, and Peter takes out a sword to attack them. Jesus could have responded when his life was in danger with violence. He didn't do it. He did not love his life even when faced with death. He continued to be faithful and obedient. He didn't compromise. Okay, so I wrote here, he certainly did not respond violently. That's Jesus. And this depiction of conquering is surely nonviolent on the part of God's people. To say that you don't love your life even when faced with death means that when you're faced with death, you don't try to protect your life through violent means, just as Jesus didn't do that. Just as Jesus achieved the victory by choosing a martyr's fate rather than continuing the spiral of violence, Christian conquerors must accept that persecution is a likely consequence of living faithfully and announcing the gospel of the kingdom, choosing to accept martyrdom if it comes to that. And let's just be honest, okay? I'm just going to make this point here. The likelihood, at least today, in 2019, that any of us are going to be martyred, as in killed, for being a Christian is unlikely. It's unlikely, okay? It could happen, but it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely, okay? But in their culture, it was extremely likely. There were martyrs already in the church. Stephen was a martyr. Jesus was a martyr. We know that Antipas in Revelation chapter 2, I think it's 2:13, was a martyr. We know that martyrs had taken place. We know there were martyrs under the altar. Lots of Christian martyrs had taken place there, okay? But the point for us is that we need to be willing to be faithful and obedient, even if it costs us our life. That's what it means to conquer the devil. We conquer the devil by in obedience, not loving our life when we're faced with death, by preaching the gospel and by identifying with the blood of Jesus. So Revelation 12:11 gives practical response to believing that the resurrection and the exaltation of Jesus has dealt a critical loss to Satan. So we have to answer the question, do we believe that the resurrection and the exaltation of Jesus has dealt a critical loss to Satan? I think the answer is yes, okay? So what's the practical application to that truth? We are to identify with Jesus' death. We are to faithfully witness the gospel of the real kingdom and remain faithful even if it costs us our life in martyrdom, okay? Don't be afraid of the martyrdom point. Just make the point of being faithful and loyal to Jesus as a lifelong commitment, and hopefully that everything will work out in the end. Okay, I got to pick up the pace a little bit. Okay, verse 12. You can see here the call to rejoice. There's a command to rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea. Why? Because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. So the eviction of Satan from heaven calls for worship. It's interesting. Calls for worship from those aligned with heaven. Notice right there. Who is to rejoice? O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Remember, by the way, that the phrase, those who dwell upon the earth, is a designation for the unredeemed in Revelation. In Revelation, those who dwell on the earth are not the people that live on the third rock from the sun. Those who dwell upon the earth are those who are unredeemed. Because right now, all of us watching this physically, unless you're watching this from space, you live on the earth. But in Revelation, the technical phrase, those who dwell upon the earth, refer to the unredeemed. So those who dwell in heaven refers to those who are identified with heaven as opposed to those who are identified with the earth. Okay? Heaven and earth are identification markers for either the people of God or the unredeemed. They're not locative markers. They're not location markers. Those who dwell in heaven are not actually living in heaven. They're identified by heaven, just as those who dwell upon the earth are those who are recognized as identified as unredeemed people. Okay? So it's a very important point that you can't just read this too literally. You have to understand how the phrases, those who dwell upon the earth and those who dwell in heaven, actually function. Okay? All right. Readers in Revelation should deeply consider how and why the exaltation of Jesus to heaven deserves worship. Again, we're seeing here the eviction of the devil calls for us to rejoice. It commands it. The word rejoice is an imperative in the second person plural. You all are to rejoice. Number two, the earth and the sea, however, are the realms of Satan. You can definitely see this now. Woe to the earth and the sea because the devil has come down to you. The earth and the sea are now Satan's realm. That's why those who dwell upon the earth is a technical phrase in Revelation for those who are unredeemed, those who are being deceived by the devil. Very soon, in chapter 13, the next chapter, we will be introduced to beasts in the plural from both the earth and the sea. I'm making this point so you can look forward to this. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the book of Revelation talks about the beast in the singular. Folks, there's two beasts in Revelation. There's a beast of the earth and the beast of the sea. You can read them in chapter 13. They're clearly distinguished. There are two beasts. There's not one beast, there's two beasts. Any casual reader can see this, okay? But it's not surprising that the devil gets evicted from heaven. He goes down to the earth. Woe to the earth and the sea. And then eventually we see in the very next chapter, the very next couple of verses, that a beast is going to come out of the sea and a beast is going to come out of the earth. Okay? So the devil comes down and that's where his dominion is. And he has a short time. This word for kairos, which is the word for kind of a decisive time. It's not a chronological time. And when it says that the devil has a short time only, this helps readers clarify what Revelation means with the imagery of time, times and a half of time, and the 1260 days. Because it says, you have to keep this in mind, the devil gets evicted from heaven. He comes down to earth. He only has a short time. What does he do during that short time? He persecutes the woman for 1260 days, or time, times and a half a time. Just by the way, if you're not familiar with that phrase, time, times and a half a time refers to one time, and then the doubling of it is times, which if time is one, then times is two. So you put those together, you actually have three together, and then half. You have 3.5 times, which is really 3.5 years. It's a cutting short of 7. 7 is the number of perfection, so the cutting short of 7 means something that's imperfect or short. 1260 days is 3.5 years as well. So notice here that Revelation tells you what a short time is. A short time is the phrase that is described as 3.5 years, 1260 days, time, time and a half a time. So Revelation explains its imagery to you. Okay, moving on, verse 13 to 14, where the dragon thrown down to earth, he persecutes the woman, but the wings of the eagle were given to the woman. She flies off to the wilderness, and she is nourished for that time, times and a half a time. Okay, so the arrival of the salvation, power, and reign and authority does not mean that God's people are exempt from persecution. And this comes as a surprise to no one, okay? So you got to remember, it's pretty clear in this passage that even though the salvation, power, and reign and authority of Christ have come, that doesn't mean that there's no more persecution in this world. It's clear. We've all suffered persecution in some sense, okay? All right. But the point is that nourishment is given. Revelation returns because now we have the woman and the dragon and the serpent, returns to parodying the Leto myth. And I talked about the Leto myth in the previous teaching in Revelation 12, 1 through 6. I don't have the time to go through all the details here. The Leto myth was a common myth that was going around in the first century, and Revelation takes it and reuses its assets to portray the woman as the people of God. It's pretty clear here. The best reading of the woman is the people of God. The male child is Jesus, and the serpent is the devil. Okay. And of course, the unnamed provider is God. Who is the provider? The one that provides the two wings of the eagle, the one that nourishes the woman. That the provider is God. So God provides the nourishment and the two eagle wings to the woman. Okay, and the two eagle wings evoke images of sustained care and renewed strength. Okay, so we're going to read some passages out of the Old Testament where it talks about how God acts as an eagle and he uses his wings to protect his people. And these images evoke care and renewed strength. Let's look at these. Exodus 19, verse 4. You yourselves, this is to the Israelites, have seen what I, God, did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Okay, that's of course God rescued them and redeemed them from Egypt and also safely brought them through the wilderness to Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 19 is right before they get the Ten Commandments. Okay, so notice you have the protection, you have the sustaining in the wilderness, and of course you have the wilderness there in itself. What do we have here? We have the two eagles' wings given to the woman to take her to the wilderness. Isaiah 40 verse 31. Yet those who wait on Yahweh will gain new strength. So they're strengthened. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They will run around and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. So the eagle's wings there represent a time of strengthening. Okay, so God's going to strengthen us in our time of persecution. Next passage, this one, Deuteronomy 32. I like this one. For Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land. There's the wilderness. And in the howling place of a wilderness. He encircled him. This is Yahweh encircled Jacob. He cared for him. He guarded him as the pupils of his eyes, like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young. Yahweh spreads his wings and caught them, caught his young being the Israelites. He carried them in his pinions. The Lord alone guided him being Jacob, and there was no foreign God with him. Okay, so there you can see God using his wings as an eagle to protect, to guide, to care, and to guard his people. Okay, that's easy to see. So, and of course, the wilderness here in our imagery, it's a common image depicting retreat from one's enemies as well as a place of nourishment. We saw that, we know that in Exodus chapter 2, Moses runs away from Pharaoh. He runs away to the wilderness and he is nourished by God. David runs away from King Saul and he's nourished in the wilderness. Elijah runs away from Ahab and Jezebel, nourished in the wilderness. All these major players do that. Okay. For Revelation's readers, however, the wilderness depicts, this is very important, pay attention. The wilderness depicts everyday social situations where God sustains, nourishes, and strengthens the persecuted. Okay. We even talk about this today. We talk about, how we are in our wilderness experience in times of temptation, and yet we stand firm in our faithfulness and we look to the nourishment and the sustaining of God. We actually draw on those passages where Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. And we say, okay, we can apply this to our life. I don't think this is a stretch. It's not very difficult for us to see. It's drawing on all of those people, all those major people in the Old Testament, Moses, David, Elijah, even Jesus himself in the New Testament, who was out in the wilderness during times of both temptation, but also times of protection and nourishment. And we can see here that the symbolism of the 3.5 times for the 1,260 days depicts a limited time of persecution, while also at the same time depicting a time when God can strengthen us, nourish us, care for us, guide us. But the question is, during our time of persecution, are we looking to God for nourishment and protection and guidance? Or are we looking to compromise? Are we looking to give up the faith? Are we looking to settle for sin? Revelation recognizes that we're going to be tempted, but it gives us a way of finding persecution. And notice, the way is not a way out by being raptured off to heaven to avoid persecution. It's nourishment and care and comfort in the midst of persecution. Okay, moving on. We see the serpent pours out water out of his mouth after the woman, but the earth helps the woman by opening the earth's mouth and drinking up the river of water. So I thought this is interesting. Just as the faithful conquerors use their mouth to witness the gospel, we saw this in 12 verse 11, we use our mouth to speak the gospel. The serpent uses his mouth to persecute the woman. That's interesting. The serpent uses his mouth to persecute the woman. The woman represents the people of God. The people of God conquer the serpent with our mouth by opening our mouth and being faithful witnesses. I like that. And protection from dangerous waters is a regular Old Testament image. You can get a dozen places you can find this. I like this one out of Psalms 32. Therefore, I don't think that's 32 verse 1. I think that's like 32 verse 11. Someone check me on that? Okay. Therefore, let everyone who is godly pray to you in a time when you may be found. Surely in a flood of great waters, they will not reach him. You are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. It's no surprise that we just sang a song of deliverance in verses 10, 11, and 12. And here we see that the people of God are protected from the flood. What do you find? Or let me know when you see it. Next one is in Psalm 69, 14 through 15. Deliver me from the mire. Do not let me sink. May I be delivered from my foes and from the deep waters. Notice how persecution is described as drowning and sinking in deep waters. May the flood of water not overflow me, nor the deep swallow me up, nor the pit shut its mouth on me. 6. 32 verse 6. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I made a mistake. 32 verse 6. I immediately saw that and I saw, that's not right. Okay. So the imagery of, 6 or 7. Psalm 32 verses 6 through 7. I apologize about my mistake. Okay. So the devil attacks us with his water, but guess what? In Revelation, the water from God is life-giving. There's a variety of passages we can look at for this. I just picked one, the easiest one, 22 verse 1, where it says, he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Okay, so the Lamb is the beast that gives you the water of life. The dragon is the beast that gives the water that tries to sink you. So which beast are you interested in getting your water from? From which water faucet are you looking to drink? Do you want to drink from the living waters that come from God and Jesus, or do you want to drink from the waters of the devil? You can make a whole sermon on that. Okay, last verse. Dragon was enraged. He went off to make war with the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So, unable to attack God and the Lamb or Michael, the dragon makes war with the rest of her children. Previously, the male child of the woman was Jesus. That was the first child of the woman. But the rest of her children are the current people of God. I think we see this. I think it's easy to see that the children of the woman represent us, okay? Since, by the way, the word for children in this passage, Revelation 12:17, is the Greek word sperma, which is where we get the word seed. It really needs to be translated the rest of her seed. There perhaps is an allusion to Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15 says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Okay? It's very common for people to read Genesis 3:15 as the seed of the woman is the Messiah. Well, that's true. But notice the seed of the woman is, metaphorically used here to refer to the enmity between the devil and the seed of the woman as us as well. Of course, it also refers to Jesus, because Jesus already mentioned earlier in verse 5. But it's very interesting that it seems to me, in my opinion, that he is using a very, very creative drawing on Genesis 3:15 in a way that, we might not normally see. Okay, now the people of God who serve as a threat to the dragon are those, they're described here in this verse, who are actively keeping God's commandments and holding on to the gospel testimony of Jesus. It's not surprising that Jesus himself was obedient to God's commandments as well as a faithful preacher of the gospel. And so by depicting the people of God in solidarity with the male child of the woman, Revelation makes Jesus an example to follow in obedience to God and in the faithful witnessing of the gospel of the kingdom. I'm making that point that, look, we are children of the woman. We are described as those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Jesus was the previous child of the woman. He, in his earthly life, kept the commandments of God and certainly preached his own testimony. He preached his own gospel. So this is both giving us a description of how we're supposed to live. We're to obey God and preach the testimony of Jesus, and also we're to be in solidarity with Jesus, who also obeyed God and preached his own testimony. Okay, 3 applications. How can you take this passage, which has 200 different interesting points, and how can you apply this to your life? Okay. All right. We can participate in the rule of God on earth as it is in heaven. That's what the Lord's Prayer says. We pray, may your rule come and may your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We can participate in this by conquering the evil one. We do this. We conquer the evil one by willingly participating in the sharing of the gospel of the kingdom. We have to decide to do that, to be faithful witnesses. By identifying with the new life redeemed by Jesus' blood. That involves, of course, consecrated holy life and an identity and identifying with Jesus, and committing to a lifetime of faithfulness, even if it ends in martyrdom. So you can take that passage in Revelation 12:11 and really meditate on that and what that might mean for your life. I think it's very, very powerful. I told you it's one of my favorite passages in Revelation. Number 2, the resurrection, the exaltation of Jesus has resulted in the eviction of Satan from heaven. This victory calls for worship, as Revelation commands us to rejoice. Okay? Jesus has been raised and exalted to heaven. It means that the devil has been dealt a critical defeat. Okay? And we're called to rejoice. We're called to celebrate. We're called to worship. We need to think about that. And number 3, persecution is inevitable. I'm going to say that again. Persecution is inevitable for those who faithfully obey Jesus. In order to deter us from compromising or responding with violence, God offers us nourishment, strength, and comfort. And we need to look to God and these promises when we feel that the persecution is tempting us to be unfaithful. Okay? Remember, persecution doesn't mean that you're being killed. Persecution doesn't mean that people are out with swords trying to get you. Persecution could just be you're being ostracized from other people. It could mean that you're being harassed. It could mean that you're being slandered. It could mean that people are trying to get you fired from your job. It could mean that people are trying to hurt you. Persecution means a lot of things. But the point is, when it happens, we cannot give in to the temptation to compromise our faith or to respond violently. That's not how we respond to persecution. We respond by being conquerors, by being faithful, and looking to God for nourishment, strength, and comfort. Okay, sorry that was a long passage. Well, I'm not sorry. Just sorry it kind of went on for a long time. Hopefully that's given you a lot of food for thought, I guess you could say. Let me take a deep breath here. Let's start off with some questions. Dean has his hand raised first.
All right, let's go back to Revelation 12, verse 6, where it's talking about the woman, us, being nourished for 1,260 days.
Right.
The 3.5 years, that is simply symbolic for a period of time. It's not a literal 3.5 years.
Correct. And the logic of that is there's a lot of different ways. First of all, we know that in Revelation, numbers are symbolic. We know that. Okay, Jesus has 7 horns. Not literally, but 7 is a number of completion. and horns imply symbol of power. Okay, so 7 is a number of completion. Breaking 7 in half is 3.5. Okay, that means you take something that's complete and perfect, and now it's incomplete. It's short. It's been shortened. Okay, so the persecution that we're dealing with, it may look like, oh my gosh, this is going on for a long time, but in reality, Revelation reveals that no. It's been broken in half. It's been shortened. It's only 3.5 years. It's only and remember, we also saw that the devil was evicted from heaven and his time was short.
Exactly.
And the short time that he has is the time that he uses to persecute us. And that short time is defined specifically as time and a half a time, and 1,260 days. So it's not meant to be a literal period.
So it's not, obviously it's not 3.5 years. It's
Correct.
just symbolic for a period of time of.
Yes, a shortened period of time.
Right. All right, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Good question. Okay. You would not believe the nonsensical things that people do in Revelation by taking symbolic numbers and reading them literally. So I'm glad we're able to settle those things. Okay. Looks like Donna has raised her hand.
As my little head spins and spins, I was just thinking of, I like to be humorous when I'm dealing with heresy, because otherwise I'd cry. All the nonsense that I have been taught and at one time believed. Notice how I phrase myself. At one time I believed. Although in believing all that, it made me so nervous. I thought, God, how crazy can God be? If monsters and sci-fi, people explain Revelation as a sci-fi. You get what I'm saying. They exaggerate, they take it all literal, and it used to scare the bejesus right out of me. I just couldn't cope with some of the translations, and I would mention it, Dustin, often to people who I know. I would bring it up. I said, are you just trying to scare the bejesus out of everyone with your literization of hailstones falling from the sky and stars? And literally people here in Indiana, they teach it literally. I've left churches because I'm just like, not that I'm scared to death, and the Lord is gracious, and I thank God thank God I have people in my life to teach a balanced understanding. I really appreciate this because I used to pray always for balance in teaching, and so few people, and I don't want to be critical, I'm just saying, oh my God, what the people believe out here makes me nervous. And of course, wouldn't you know it that I have met them all? Wouldn't you know that they all knocked on my door, and I'm over here explaining it as, well, this isn't literal, and they're like, what? I'm like, look, you're going to scare the hell out of people if you're going to be, they're going to run out with microscopes and, be looking at the stars, and people have done this. And, even the group that I was, and I love the people in SGF, but I even questioned, I even asked John, John asked, what is going on here? Are you people crazy? The reason I'm saying this is because, unless we get a proper balanced teaching about the historical evidence of who is the audience in Revelation, what is the book of Revelation really, really all about? How can we embrace something if we're taught in ignorance? Fear is ignorance. And so we need a teacher, a gifted teacher who will sweat, through the studies and, accommodate us in an effectual way so that we can embrace the book of Revelation. There's so many who have, I've met them, and, my heart bleeds, Dustin. I wish you could go everywhere and be welcomed everywhere you go, and I do pray for that for people as yourself, because ignorance teaches people to fear, and it holds people back from worshiping God. And it's not, if you don't know the difference, if you don't expose yourself to something different, then it can really create, a misunderstanding of God. It misrepresents God. It makes him look like a a derelict, crazy God, a schizophrenic God, who's throwing stars down at us and balls of fire. Well, seriously, I've definitely have heard this doomsday preaching, and then yet be effectual in sharing the awesomeness of God so that we don't have this trivial depreciation of God, because, you never want to fall on the wrong side of God's heart, because, it will cause you to be doomed. So, but you do that yourself. God's not doing that to you. So there's a different perspective here. I know I'm long-winded, but I really appreciate your sharing, Dustin, wrapping my heart around, things that seem new to me, but more practical and more with a sensationalism. And the Cecil B. DeMille's movie film critics, have made God look like a crazy man, and it has prevented people from worshiping God. I know this is true. And I come along and try to explain the goodness of God, but you do a much better job than I, because, I'm not a teacher. For right now, I've kind of paused for the cause of being re-instructed by people that have a proper understanding of the book of Revelation, especially. Okay, thank you for hearing me.
Well, I think it's also good to see whenever you hear, various teachers, ask yourself, what is the application that they are making this text say? Are they telling you that you need to be afraid and watch the news and the newspaper and CNN to see what in the world's going on? Look at my application. My application says to look to God for nourishment. It says to worship God. It says to preach the gospel and to be faithful. Nothing that I've said today is, oh, you need to be afraid, or I'm like, look, and this is not me. I'm just telling you what I think the text says. Okay. I think anybody could, hopefully I'm correct in what I'm interpreting, but I think anybody could read this and draw comfort from it. But that's the point. Notice there that you're describing that people they take Revelation and they weaponize it as a fear tactic, and a way to kind of control, history. And I'm saying, no, this is a book that's meant to encourage, to comfort, to get us to rejoice and to worship and to be faithful. And it's extremely practical. That's the point, is that this Revelation could be your daily bread if you understand it correctly. It's very, very practical once you grasp what in the world is going on with it. And that's why I was so eager to share this book with the group, because people weren't looking at the book as a book of encouragement and comfort. And hopefully we've been doing this for a year now. I look back, we started this November of 2018. Hopefully I've earned your trust at this point, that this book can be encouraging. So, okay. Thank you for your comments. Rudy has his hand raised.
Yeah. Dustin, I want to ask about, from verse 9 onwards, and the great dragon was cast down, that old serpent. So this context, you are saying it's after the resurrection of Jesus, not something that will happen in the future, but it's right now, in the sense it's showing it in a figurative way, how things are now.
Yeah, I think that's the way that Revelation depicts. I mean, if I'm following the argument that Revelation 12 gives us, we have in verse 5 that Jesus is exalted to heaven, and then 2 verses later, a war breaks out and the devil is kicked out of heaven. Okay, and it's interesting if you kind of look at this from the perspective of other passages. In the Old Testament, like you can look at Job, and you can see that that Satan is up there in heaven with God, accusing Job. Okay, so he's able to be up there in heaven. Okay, but you don't see that in the New Testament anymore. Okay, in fact, the New Testament, you have in 1 Peter chapter 5, Satan is roaring about like a roaring lion. It's an image of Satan on the earth. You don't get any of these images of Satan up there in heaven, as the prosecutor, accusing the people of God anymore. So I think that's what it's saying, but I don't think it's saying it's going to be a future thing, because otherwise what relevance would that have for the original readers? It just wouldn't have any
Right.
relevance for them.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. Okay, I'm going to go to Michelle.
Well, I just wanted to say that I really liked how you did this, explain this teaching. But what I got out of it was the whole thing about, standing up and, recognizing that we will, suffer persecution. And I liked how you explained the various forms, how that can come to pass in our lives. It may not be death because, like you said, this is, the United States, and, probably won't have that in our lives here, but the various different ways that we do stand to, persecution is important to stand up and pass the test, so to speak. So I really like that. Thank you.
Sure.
You know, I have another question for you, Dustin. There's one verse, and I think it's in Peter someplace. I can't find it right off the top of my head, but it's where Satan is still accusing us. He's going before God and accusing us day and night. Now, my understanding, or originally my understanding, was when he was thrown out of heaven, that he lost his position. He no longer has a position in heaven, but he still, correct me if I'm wrong, but he still goes up before God to accuse us both day and night. How is that reconciled with what you've been teaching?
I'm trying to see what
I think it's in Peter someplace.
Yeah, I'd like to. It'd be helpful if I could look at that particular passage. So where is it? We looked at this one today. Okay. So in Revelation 12:10, it still calls him the accuser of our brethren. Okay, and I still think that the devil is able to function in that way, and he can still accuse us of our sin. Okay, but he's not doing this in the location of heaven, because he's been kicked out of heaven. Okay. So I think he can still function as the accuser, but he does not. Jesus is now enthroned in heaven, and the devil's not allowed there anymore. Yeah. That's his authority in heaven has been taken away, and the devil and the angels have been thrown down to earth. And the point there is to get us to look down here on the earth to see, okay, what is he? How is he influencing people and nations and realms and ideologies and falsehoods right now? Okay, I mean that's in reality, isn't that more relevant for our lives anyway?
Okay.
Yeah. If you find that passage, let me know.
I think it's in Peter, either 1st or 2nd Peter, and I can't find it right off the top.
That's okay. Well, we can still talk at some point. So I'd like to look into that. So
okay.
Okay. Let me check the chat. Did I get everything here? Okay. Yeah, there's a point made in chat that some bakers, if you refuse to bake a cake for certain people, you'll be persecuted. That's right. So I think a lot of people, maybe it's just because of bad teachings on Revelation, they think that persecution must mean violent persecution, as in you're going to be attacked with weapons or guns. It doesn't have to be that. Like I said, persecution can be slander. It could be ostracization. It could be name calling. There's the word persecution is very wide. It means a lot of things, and you could look and you can look at how Jesus was persecuted. Look at the Book of Acts. You can look in I mean, persecution could be confiscation of your property. There could be lots of things. So, yeah. So, but the point is that however it is, regardless of where we live, and I'm aware that not all, even people online right now, live in America. However the persecution might be, we need to be faithful. Because Jesus was faithful in the midst of persecution, and he had it way worse than we did. So, and he's called to be our example. And I want to point us to Jesus. I'm not pointing you guys to me. I'm saying, look to Jesus, look to the Lamb as the example, and follow him. That's what Revelation is trying to get us to do. So, okay. Any final comments from anybody before we sign off for the day? Okay. I'll just make this comment here that if anybody watching this would like to be involved with what we're doing, you can contact us at the contact information at allegiancetotheking.org. And of course, you can check out our Facebook page, Christian Virtual Fellowship, and Allegiance to the King. All right.